Yes, I feel much better than last week. Thank you for noticing, Terry. I don't know if anybody watched the session 3 video, but I'm definitely not going to be watching it. Welcome, people that are just coming in. We are just all jumping into class and getting ourselves settled, so yeah, we'll give it another minute and then we'll get going. Okay, welcome. Nice to see everybody. So we're on session 4 already. We're going to talk about grant funding basics today. So nice to see you all. Happy to have you here. Let's see, did anybody have any questions or follow-up from session 3? Does anybody have any awesome funders that they found that they want to share? How is your funder research going? Anybody want to share? Okay, we'll assume it's going amazing. Just a quick update about the grant mentoring from Kelly Nonprofit. We are going to email, we'll send out a link and then you can sign up for that grant mentoring through that link. We're going to email out that link after the funder panel, after the next session. So you'll all receive that link in an email. And so that's a good reason to be sure if we don't have your most updated email address, or if you haven't been receiving weekly emails from Jimena and I, please message Jimena and let her know what email you'd like to be using. Again, we're going to use your emails to send out the information for that technical assistance and grant mentoring from Kelly Nonprofit. So I just want to be sure we have your most updated email. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. So yeah, let's go check out these group norms again, as we always start our class doing. So if you can keep your video on as much as possible, it's really helpful for me to see your faces. I'm going to try to get us out of here on time today. I've actually been pretty great at that so far. I'm pretty proud of myself. And then just a reminder that we won't have a break. It's a full 2 hours, so get up, take care of yourselves as needed, move around, do what you need to do. And if you're not speaking, keep yourself on mute, so we aren't getting background noise from other people. Excuse me. Okay, and today we're going to start getting into the grant writing and the different sections of the grant. In the first 3 sessions, we talked about getting your organization ready, getting all of your organizational documents together. We talked about mission, vision, strategic planning. We spent a session on budgets, and we spent a session on funder research. So today we're going to move on to start getting into like the meat of what is in a grant. What are you going to have to tell them? So we'll go through the grant purpose and your responsibilities as a person applying to a grant or an organization applying to a grant. We'll talk about the grant lifecycle. We'll talk about the common grant elements, like what are the different pieces that you're going to need to respond to. And then we'll talk about grant planning in general, just wrapping it up. Are you ready? Do we have people in today's session, just a show of hands, like who's been writing grants for a while or who's written grants in the past? Great. So yeah, people with experience, feel free to share your experience and share what you know and add in extra information. Again, we like to keep this as like a group conversation. So this is a peer learning platform, so we're all learning from each other. So we want to hear your expertise too. Okay, so let's jump into grant purpose and responsibility. We're going to go through just a couple of slides that are like very informational. They can be a little dry, but it's important to spend some time understanding the roles and responsibilities of a foundation, of the foundation giving the grant and the organization receiving the grant. And this is just to like help organize your thoughts a little bit about like, why are we going through this process of writing a grant, right? And at the end, after we get through 4 slides or something like that, we're just gonna do a little quiz. So prepare. So this first slide, we're looking at what's the purpose of a grant, and this is the purposes for the grantor. So the person who's giving the grant, so the foundation or the state or the county or the government body or agency or whoever it is. So make a significant contribution to a focus area that's important to the grantor. Reduce their yearly tax liability. Raise their profile in the community. Again, we've talked about that a little bit, like a foundation or a corporate foundation might want to partner with you to show the impact, to show their positive impact in the community, right? Fulfilling a mandate because they have to. A lot of private foundations exist because they're required, the business or the corporation is required to be getting rid of 5% of their funds every year, right? And then also another purpose for a grantor of grant making is to leave a legacy. So they are, they have a cause that's important to them, a focus area that's important to them, and they've decided to put their money towards that, right? So, oh, sorry, did someone have something to say?
We have 3 hands up: Amanda, Courtney, and Lacey.
Oh, I think that those were hands up for, well, are there questions or were those hands up for the question before when I asked you to raise your hand?
Maybe there's still questions. We have Amanda and Lacey still. Feel free to unmute yourself if you do have a question.
Cool. Thanks for checking a minute. I think those hands went up when I'm gonna just lower them for them. I think those went up when I prompted you all to raise your hands. Okay, so the purpose of a grant for the grantee, so for the applying organization. So you are seeking grants to, basically provide your organization with money, right? Get some money to help your programs, activities, internal functions move forward, right? To keep the day-to-day of your organization going. So help you fulfill your mission, provide funding towards the organization as a whole, provide funding towards a new or existing project or program, to support, build, change, maintain a physical space, or to purchase tangible items. And then to help an organization leverage even more funding. So you might be looking at a funder we talked about this a little bit, that snowball effect, right? You're looking at a funder and they're going to provide you money. It's not gonna be anywhere close enough to like fund your entire project or program. So, you are going to receive some money from them, and then you're going to use that money to leverage even more money from another organization or from several other organizations. So the idea of leverage is being able to say to a funder, like, look, I already have other organizations who are backing my project. And that's a great reason why you should also be backing my project. Okay, so back to the grantor, the person giving the grant. What are their responsibilities? Ensure that the applicant is who they say they are and doing what they say they do, right? So, that risk management piece, doing their due diligence to make sure that you are a legitimate organization who is going to spend their money in a respectful way, right? So ensuring that the grantee meets the grantor's guidelines. A grantor must accept no benefit other than recognition, so they aren't receiving any money back in return, any benefits back in return, anything like that. Except for potentially some recognition, a plaque on the wall, or a thank you, or a newsletter, or a press release or something like that. The grantor's responsibility to track and report which organizations their money has supported. They need to report that for their taxes, so they report that through their 990. And then again, that legacy piece. So by funding you, is that going to support their legacy?
Bonnie, we have a question in the chat from Carter, if you want to look at it.
Yeah. So yeah, this is about that leverage piece. Good question, Carter. So do organizations typically need to have the grant already awarded to qualify for match funds? Or is it sometimes sufficient to say in the grant application, we have applied to other funds and strongly hope for matching funds? Yeah, I think that your second scenario is okay. A lot of times funders will ask, like, who else are you going to for funding and what's the status of that? And so you'll be able to tell them, like, I have funding secured from these funders. I have funding pending from these funders, and I have funding planned from these other funders, right? And that just shows, like, the ones that are secured, those are gonna be the strongest case for that match funding. But if you're saying like, oh, as part of my plan, I also have an application into Oregon Community Foundation, I'm just waiting to hear back from them, because it takes 6 months to hear back from Oregon Community Foundation a lot of times, right? So, so I'm just in that waiting phase, but I've already put my application in and I've already done the work. And then also in the future, I'm also considering applying to these other foundations who are going to help me like get that full amount. So all of them can be shown as match. Obviously, the ones that are going to have the strongest influence are the ones that are secured already. Okay, and then grantee responsibilities, last slide in this section. So our responsibility as the organizations applying to grants, seeking grants, and then managing grant awards once we receive them. We need to use the money for the intended purpose, so use the money how we say we're going to use it. And be in communication with our funders, report any deviations from the original budget or project. A lot of times, especially with your government funders, they'll say any variance in your budget of 10% per line item, we don't need to hear from you. But if your line items are moving around over 10% within any line item, like all of a sudden we need to spend 50% more for staff salaries than we thought we were going to. So we're actually not going to buy that equipment we're going to put money into salaries, they're gonna wanna hear from you, and they're gonna wanna, you're going to want to get approval from them before you start spending that money in that different way. So to give no benefit other than recognition, so they can't receive any benefit other than recognition, and we won't give any benefit other than recognition. To spend the grant award within the grant period. To meet obligations outlined in the request and contract, so. Reporting, to, you know, to basically meet what we said we were going to do. If they would like us to meet with them quarterly, if they would like a site visit, whatever we've agreed to do, be sure that we do that. At the end of the grant period, if there's any unspent money, it's our obligation to return that. Although you can ask, and it's always a good question to ask, like, hey, we have some money left over and I have this need, or I have this gap. Share something out there that you'd be able to spend that money on. And say, we'd love to put that money to use in this way. Can we do that? And then that just gives them an option. It's a lot easier for them to have you spend the money than to get that money back, and then they have to deal with that tax wise and reporting wise, and they have to figure out something else to do with it, right? So give them an option if you're going to come in under on your grant award. And then accurately report at the end of the grant cycle. So keeping funders informed is the big takeaway from this slide. Talk to them throughout your grant award as things change. We all know that plans are going to change from what you put in your proposal. So with those changes, that especially the ones that affect budget, keep your funders informed. And then another thing to set you up for success as far as responsibilities goes. Save stories, take pictures, and track data for that final report throughout the year. Not just in the last couple of weeks when all of a sudden you have a report due, right? So remembering, putting it somewhere, giving yourself a note, like, oh, remember to take photos. And you've probably been told that by programs people at some point, somebody in your organization, like, oh, please be sure to take photos when you're there. They probably need to report that to somebody, right? To report their activities to somebody. Okay, so let's do a quick quiz together. No pressure. We'll just talk through it together. So first question that I'm going to put out there. Can you put the grantor's name in your monthly newsletter? What do you guys think? So feel free to come off mute, put something in the chat. Yes, no, or maybe. Can you share their name publicly?
I would say only with permission.
Yeah, so I have a maybe, yes for recognition, with permission. Yeah, so you're so yeah, you're gonna want to be sure that that's that they've agreed to that, right? Some funders might want to be anonymous for whatever reason, So just be sure there's clear communication on that. Some funders will say like, yes, I want you to talk about me, and this is how I want you to talk about me. And also here's a JPEG of my logo and please use it. Right? So like you just want that to be if somebody doesn't, exactly. Like for a private foundation or a private donation, sometimes funders just want to keep that information close because they don't want other people asking them for money, right? I've seen that when they're like, yeah, we're gonna fund this, but like I'm very specifically funding you, and I don't, you know, like we have a relationship going, and let's just stick to that. Yeah. So just got a grant and they asked us to hold off any announcement until they did their own press release. Yes, that's a great example. So being aware of issues like that might come up, where they want to be the first ones to announce it, right? And so just knowing those preferences and having that clear communication, a lot of times that information is going to come when they send you, an award announcement. They'll send you an email or they'll send you a contract agreement or whatever. Read through that whole thing, because sometimes it's like, in the end, like, this is how we want to be acknowledged. So just reading those entire documents and taking note of it and sharing that information out with the people that need to have it. Okay. Can you use any unexpended funds as you wish? Yes, no, or maybe? No, no, no. Unless okayed by funder. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. I think you guys heard that one. So it's our responsibility as the organizations receiving grants to use the funding as we say, as we've agreed to use it, right? To use it towards the purpose that they're funding. If that needs to change, because we know things change throughout the year, be in communication with your funder before you make those decisions, right? Yeah, so if you ask and it's somewhat related, usually you want to make the case that like, oh, you know, we were going to build a new front office or something like that, but I don't know what happens with a front office. None of the desks worked, so I don't know. So you had to go to a different vendor in the end, and the cost was different, and you actually saved some money. So that's great. Now you have a little bit of money left over, and you want to use that to buy supplies. You know, you want to like get supplies for the next year to stock your front office. Ask them if you can use money towards that purpose. It's related. And so the odds are that it's going to be easier for them to say yes. So, and then this next question is I think we just went over it. What would you do if your project changed during the funder cycle? Contact your funder, right? Communicate, yeah. So being in communication with them, and you know, that relationship is really just starting when you've received that award. So feel free to know who your program officer is and reach out to them, and just keep them up to date. A lot of times if you have quarterly reporting, or, you know, intermittent reporting, whatever that looks like, that's a time for you to say like, this has changed, you know, we have to make this adjustment, we spent this much and that's more or less than we thought we were going to spend. And that's a time to like start those conversations, right? So that's an extra benefit of having that required reporting. Okay, so we're gonna look at the life cycle of a grant, right? So we have this cycle here, and it starts up in the top left with preparation. So project prep is a lot of what we've been talking about. Work with your team members to determine the needs and strategy for the project you seek to fund, and conduct research to build an overarching list of the applications you'll submit. So this is everything we've been talking about so far, right? That project charter document, that's all about preparing for grant writing. So reference that and use that as your guide for the preparation phase, right? Research and relationship, researching those grants, reaching out to funders, find funding opportunities that fit with this program that you've outlined, and then get a timeline together and, you know, start those applications as those due dates come up. So application and submission, that's the writing and submission, or application and submission. Complete the narrative, financial and supplemental information required for each grant. This is what we're going to be talking about today, that writing and submission stage. it's good to have other people in your organization look at that application, look at that, proposal that you put together, if that's possible. And that could be editing just for grammar, but also just editing for like, am I lining this out clearly, editing for clarity, right? And the most, the important pieces of the writing and submission on a high level is, giving yourself time before that deadline. Whatever the grantor has put out there as the deadline for when the grant application is due. Again, there are some grant applications that don't have a due date. You can submit them anytime. So then you might need to give yourself a deadline, depending on how you work, right? If that's something that, you need to have that date in front of you. Okay, so then, you have your application submitted and then it's out of your hands and it's to the funders, right? So that review stage is that pending stage, right? Like I've done the work, I've put the application in and I'm waiting to hear back. So the funder is going to review your application. They might come back to you with some questions. They might just want to have some follow-up with you. They might even schedule a site visit. I don't know, I think I asked this already, but has anybody in this group done a site visit before? Had a site visit with a funder? Okay, yeah. And so usually the funder will just, come to your space, although there's been a lot of virtual site visits over the last several years, right? That's an opportunity, for them to come to your space, see what's happening, witness your projects or programs in action, and then also just get to know you as a real human, right? The thing with grant writing, it's writing, which is not all of our strongest, methods of communication, right? So those site visits can be a nice opportunity, or those phone calls for clarification or whatever, to make your case in a different way, right? To have a conversation with somebody and talk about your organization. Okay, so that's the review, and then, you'll get a decision. If you're not awarded, then your cycle is gonna be a little shorter and you're back to the preparation phase, right? If you're awarded, then you're gonna go into your grant term. And this is where you are going to meet all of the things that you said you were going to do in your grant application, right? So this is a really good time to go back and read that grant application and figure out what you said you were gonna do. And I mean, for most, grant terms are varying, different lengths of time. Some are a couple of years, some are 5 years. But generally from like a private local foundation, you're gonna have a 1-year grant term. So you'll have 1 year to finish this project. And then as that year comes to a close, you'll be reporting on that project. And again, if we're looking at government grants or other kinds of grants, you may be reporting quarterly throughout over 2 years, or you may be reporting every 6 months over 5 years, or whatever that looks like. So being sure that you know what those requirements are. And those reports are going to vary a little bit too. Some funders are just going to ask, like, was the project complete? Was it successful? Some funders are going to want like a financial report along with your narrative report. Some funders are going to ask for pictures, some are going to ask for some data, all of that stuff. So just knowing what the expectation is. Okay, let's check out this slide again. We've seen it a couple times. So the different types of funding: capital, general operating, capacity building, and program funding. Any final questions coming up about these different kinds and who funds what, or where your project might fit in? Anything coming up on these slides that we want to cover? Okay, yeah. I mean, generally, the majority of grants that you see are going to be program or project specific, so this pink one in the top left. And, sorry, let me move this around. And then those general operating in the bottom right, in the gray square, those are gonna be your most flexible funding that's going to, allow you to spend it on your organization as you see fit, right? And then this is another repeat slide that we've looked at a couple times. So the common proposal elements, looking at why and how. So looking at need, impact, activities, and implementation. So this is really like the heart of your application, right? So why are you doing this? What impact is it going to have? How are you going to do this? And what is your plan? Like, can you line out that timeline of how this is going to happen? So when you're starting to line out these pieces, some people like to start with a budget and just say like, well, what are my costs going to be to do this? Others start with like, what are all the actions going to be and lining that out. You know, you might think about like, what is the need? What's the problem that I'm trying to solve, and really hone in on like, what's that impact or what's that outcome statement? And then build a bigger project based off of that. Again, that project charter form is going to help you think through these different components and make some notes that you can then use for the full grant application. So use that project charter, write on it, get your ideas in there. And then this is all about, you know, that project charter worksheet, and most of what we've done in this class so far is about that preparation phase, right? It's about having your ideas ready, and then the opportunity comes up, and then you can start plugging into that application when the opportunity comes up, right? So just having your thoughts kind of lined out now, maybe before you know who that funder is going to increase your chance for success when that funder does come around. So let's talk about that why and how. The needs statement. So this is a section in your project charter. A needs statement is going to be, you know, this is going to come up in every grant application. You'll have some sort of question that's going to ask why. And you know, one that I see a lot is why this project, why now, which I really like to keep in mind, because that why now piece lets you like put it in context, right? Yeah, maybe this is a project that we've been doing for the last 20 years, but this year specifically, it's important for these reasons, and we're going to take this specific approach, right? We're going to reach people in this community specifically, or we're going to, I don't know, move our intake online to make it easier for people to access, or something like that, right? Like, why this project and why now? I think the why now piece really like gets you thinking about the specifics. So that questions you're trying to answer with that needs statement. What's the problem you're trying to solve? How do you know the project is needed? How have those impacted by this project been involved in identifying the need? So how have you engaged the people that are going to be the receivers of this project or program? What statistics do you have to back up this need? And what stories do you have to back up this need? And if this is a project that's occurred before, how do you know that the projects, like what stories do you have to show that the project's been useful and the project's been impactful? So, excuse me. These are really, in a need statement, they're really asking for data, right? And I just wanted to share the article that was shared today from the Grantsmanship Center that comes in through their newsletter. It was something about like the most common pitfall for early grant writers or something like that. And what they identified was accurately identifying the problem or need your organization wants to tackle is the single most important factor in developing a powerful grant proposal. So I think, Jimena, can you share that article? Oh, you did already.
Yes, I
Thank you.
just pasted it.
That article's in there. It was just, it's really short. It was just a cute little like here's how to think about framing that need statement. Beyond like, well, beyond saying my project or program is necessary. Being able to say why is my project or program necessary, right? So when we're looking at data, we've talked about data quite a bit. It can mean, there's a lot of different sources and types of data, right? So we're looking at this stories and stats. Quick tip is really quantitative versus qualitative, right? And you need both to tell a complete story. So that quantitative piece is going to be the hard data and numbers, and that qualitative piece is going to be the heartwarming story or just a story of success. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to make you cry, depending on what your programs are, right? But those personal stories of one person's experience because they were part of your program. So this quantitative qualitative piece, you can also think about it as, well, it can be communicated in terms of external data and in terms of internal data, right? So think about what, we talked about different resources for external data. We talked about community needs assessments. We talked about excuse me. We talked about Ford Family Foundation's Organ by the Numbers. We talked about like places where you can find those hard data, right? But also think about what you've collected internally. Like, do you have hard data just on we've served this many people and they have reported that these kind of outcomes, right? Or do you have internal data about, we had one particular person that came into my robotics program, and because they were part of my robotics program, they were able to, find some friends, find a community, explore a topic that they didn't identify with previously, and build some confidence and move on to I don't know, compete in the robotics competition, right? And I know that because I've interviewed them and they told me, and also they gave me permission to share their story, right? So think about what you have available on hand, who you can talk to, especially the people that are part of your programs that you can talk to. And it doesn't have to be like a big research paper, right? It doesn't have to be like a college essay or whatever. You can get some of these stories and stats, some of this information just from the people around you. So just a little, oh, and then I just also want to point out, sorry, reading my notes. So when we're talking about people and we're sharing those stories, I just want to call back to that idea of strengths-based storytelling and framing those impact stories or those success stories from a strengths-based perspective, right? So how are you talking about these individuals that you're putting in your stories? and how are you framing where they were before and where they were after experiencing your programs? So keeping those ideas in mind. So let's do a quick breakout, brainstorming need. So the two questions we have: what kind of stories or data will best demonstrate need for your project? And how can you easily track data or collect stories to demonstrate need on a regular basis? So do you have data collection methods set up? And share your ideas for how you all collect data and what methods you use. And I actually did not. Do you have these available to put the questions in the chat, Jimena?
No, but I can broadcast them really quick, just in
Okay.
case people forget them, or yeah, I'll broadcast them really quick.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna open up the rooms and then I'll broadcast the questions if you didn't have time to write them down.
Thanks for doing that.
No worries. Let me. And if you're unable to join or your mic doesn't work or whatever, that's perfectly fine. Or if you don't want to join, feel free to send me a message, please. Thank you. There's about 7 minutes left. I did give him 10 minutes since that was on the notes. There's about 3 minutes.
Thanks. Just as a update, the cat gave up on sleeping on the stack of books and did not knock them over. I'm so surprised. Welcome back. Let's see. Is everyone back now?
Everyone should be back.
Cool. So just to orient us to where we are, this conversation, refers to the success measurement section of your project charter. If you have that in front of you, if you're working on that. So this conversation about data and qualitative and quantitative sources of data. Put your notes in the success measurement section of your charter. And as we're coming back, I'd love to hear what your conversations were. Does anybody want to report out from your group conversations about what kind of systems or processes you might have in place or be able to put in place to collect data?
Well, I'll jump in there. Oh, one of the things I was asking about is ways to get people to provide the data, especially the participants. And something that we had not done before, but two others in the chat room shared that they incentivize participants to provide the information that we're needing to gather. And that when I said about how much are we talking, they were saying about $100 is what it's taking. And that wasn't something that I had felt comfortable to put in a grant, but it sounds like you know, a line item of incentives for, you know, program participants. So I learned something there.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And depends on the funder, right? If they're willing to fund that or not, but that doesn't mean, you know, always worth putting it in the application. And see what they say.
Yeah, one caveat was that it wasn't a line item in the grant application, but because the grant writer then funds other people that actually execute the program that don't have to do, you know, that much detail in terms of what the funding actually is for. So I don't have that luxury, or I shouldn't say luxury, but you know, normally we're the ones actually executing. So maybe it's just folded into a little more miscellaneous expenditures. So it's a good
Program supplies, something like that.
idea. Yeah, gift cards, program supplies.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Terry. Yeah, how do you get people to respond to those surveys that you send out? It's a good thing to think about.
I have one. We talked about the different stories and data in our group, but I didn't talk about it related to my particular project. So I just brought up my project charter to remind me that I'm supposed to be filling this out. So one of the things we're trying to do is we want to do our rehabilitate our park. It has a sand surface, the equipment's old, it's not really that accessible. So I was thinking what kind of storage or data, but I realized that we kind of got one, but it was very weird. My deputy and I were walking down to the park one day because it was a beautiful day. And while we were down there, I said, let's talk to some people down here about what they think about our park and our playground. So we did. And I got some we got some information, but it was very informal. So, you know, I can put a good narrative, I think, on that, but I don't really have the survey or a focus group. Or so I was thinking, well, that's good information, but you know, how do we track that? Like easily
Yeah.
track data or collect stories, you know. Me and my deputy can write what we did, but we didn't actually collect anything. So it makes me
Yeah.
kind of think about, well, how do I get actual physical data to put in there?
Right.
Does Depot Bay have a social media presence, or do you have a Facebook page?
We do. We actually have 2 Facebook groups. So we're getting
Awesome.
ready. So we're
Yeah,
gonna
do a
probably
survey on Facebook.
Yeah. Does that work best?
I have seen our town use it and a couple of other towns use it. And, you know, I mean, you're not gonna get 100 people jumping in there usually unless it's really controversial. But you get enough that you can use it for a basis or something.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I thought about doing something on Facebook. We're getting ready to enter that outreach phase where we're trying to get some input from people about what they'd like to see. It'll be interesting to see it, but I'll definitely will look at doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, you can link to Survey Monkey out of that, or you
Okay,
can link back to the town site to the Survey Monkey
okay, I like that.
survey
Ah,
out of that.
technology.
Yep, use it, you got it.
Mhm.
Cool, thank you guys. And I'd also say, Kim, for those, for that story that you collected, I think that that's usable. It's not sitting in a formal place, right? But it's still something like, especially if you jot it down now
Mhm, mhm.
and just have it as a resource, right? That's still something you can throw in as like, I've talked to people in the community and this is what I've heard.
Yeah, and we talked to them, and we actually got some visitors. We got some tourists visiting the area, and then we got a couple from locals. So, yeah,
Cool.
so that's kind of,
Yeah,
so I'm definitely jotting that down.
nice, nice. Jody, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, with what Kim was bringing up and Rosie was helping. I'm not sure if I missed that part, but you may want to do the search on social media first to see if people have posted different comments. that might help guide you of other specific questions to ask. And then also just a word to, not a warning, but just be aware that unfortunately keyboard warriors are more negative and to not take it personal, and maybe where you can direct to say, hey, we're trying to do this project, any helpful, insight, and can we follow back up with you? Because you, Bonnie, and the rest, you could advise better. Is it better to have like a document saying, hey, I appreciate your information, and if you're willing, would you mind if we used your name? And how it would be used or something. Does that actually provide feedback better for the grantors? Or do they just looking at numbers? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think, so I do think that like when you're getting those like stories back, to be able to attach a name to it, you're gonna need permission to do that, right? If you don't have the permission though, I think that it's still powerful and still shows an impact to say like this resident or, this client or whoever, and then tell the story. It's nice if you can get the permission to share their name, but definitely not necessary. Was that your question?
Right. And I'm just wondering, or if they'd at least just give you a first name,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
something like that. But
Yep.
I'm just wondering, do the grantors really look at that as far as validity, or are they just looking from a number statistics of saying, hey,
I,
we had 25 people in support of this?
yeah, I think you'll see both, for sure. I think that you're gonna want a nice balance of both of those things to be able to make your case to the fullest. And the other nice thing too is, when you're doing these community surveys or you're having conversations with people, this is also showing like, how have you engaged your community? Like, how do you know this is what your community wants, right? And that's also helping to answer this question. Tammy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add into that conversation about do stories matter? They really do, because I'm going to give you an example of a grant that we're finishing up in Kenya right now. It's for teen mothers who are essentially ostracized once they become pregnant. They generally leave school. It used to be illegal for them to stay in school. They've changed the law, but the culture is very slow to change. And so we have examples of, there's 50 girls that have participated in the program during the grant cycle. And we have examples of at least one girl who literally was on the edge of killing herself before this opportunity became available. And because the opportunity became available and she got back into school, she learned a vocation, she had a support system, including counselors. It was more than just the vocation. She is now one of our most successful girls coming out of the program to be able to financially independently support herself and her children. So that's an extreme story, but those kinds of stories for whatever you're doing, if you can get personal and it's of course real, you're not manufacturing it, but they're going to really pull at the heartstrings when people are reading at this about why this is important.
It shows the true reality of it too, right? Like, it's never just up as far as success rate goes, whichever way is up for you guys. Like, there's gonna be the ups and downs of working with every client, and that's the reality of the work that we're doing, and that can help to show like, hey, it took 2 years of back and forth with this client before we found permanent housing for them or whatever it was, right? And like, but if we're like consistent and we keep going and we keep a relationship going, then we're going to have a greater chance of success. So like, we need funding to keep these relationships going, right? So it helps describe those pieces. Okay, so moving on in that project charter, let's look at the project description section. And this kind of answers that piece that we were just talking about. So most funders are going to be outcomes based, right? They're going to want to see like, what are the goals? What are the outcomes? What's going, what are the, like, what's going to change at the end of this funding? they want your why statement to be measurable and reportable. So that doesn't necessarily mean like we're going to serve 25 people, but those parameters help. Like we're going to serve 25 people and here's how we serve them, right? Like that's in the reporting piece. So what goals and outcomes can you attach to your project? So this is in the SMART deliverables and project description sections of the project charter. Make a couple notes about how you might put parameters on like, on what impact are you going to make? Does anybody in this group have have the words that make up the SMART acronym in their head? I don't.
Specific, measurable, achievable,
Yeah.
realistic, and time-based.
Yes, thank you. Nice job, Carter. I was
Of
like,
course.
I could do a couple of them, but yeah.
Can you put that in the chat, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so SMART's an acronym, so think about these different pieces that make up SMART goals as you're putting your goals together. And I think Carter's putting that in the chat for us. Thank you. So these are the activities you're going to undertake to meet the outcomes you desire, right? So the project description is what you're going to do to get to these outcomes, to these SMART deliverables. So, so what goals have you set? And then what activities are you going to carry out to reach the goals? So some examples might be the activity is provide tutoring services to teens who need support in math class. And the deliverable might be 20 teenagers will receive professional tutoring services. 10 teenagers will demonstrate increased math skills by the end of the school year, June 2025, right? So we have 10 teens, what the improvement is going to be or what the change is going to be, increased math skills, and in a timeline by the end of the school year of June 2025. So along with this project description piece, as part of the project description, some funders will request a work plan or list of activities or a timeline with milestones. Even if they're not specifically requesting this, this is like a good way to get your proposal organized. And the budget is actually always also a really good organizing item for putting your proposal together. So when you think about like putting those activities into a timeline, right? And a really high level timeline that's really, really straightforward, might say like April 2025, submit grant requests to Blue Mountain Community Foundation and Wild Horse Foundation. And then we're gonna let a lot of time pass while we wait for the responses on those grant requests. So in April, we're gonna submit our grant requests. In June, we're going to secure full program funding and we're going to start outreach and registration activities. Then in August, program delivery begins, meet with clients weekly, collect feedback monthly. And then at the end of the year, so that's all the action that's going to be August through the following August or whatever it is. And then a year later, August 2026 or wherever we are, I forgot my timeline. The program is going to end, the grant's going to come to an end, and you're going to compile data and report back by August 31st when the grant cycle closes. So if you're working off this time, you know, if you have that timeline kind of built out of when you expect this to all these actions to happen, that's going to help you frame your project description, right? But then remembering, just this comes with a bit of caution, when you're putting that timeline together, this is your best case scenario timeline. We know like the same when we've been talking about changes to the budget. We know that unexpected things are going to come up. We know that things are going to change. It's not gonna go perfectly. Just know that before going into it, right? So we're going to put a timeline out there as if this was perfect. But we're also going to expect the unexpected, right? And so leaving some wiggle room in that timeline is going to help you really like put the realistic parameters on this, right? Like so just giving yourself a little bit of wiggle room as you're building up that timeline. Okay, so one of the handouts you received in your email was called Grant Writing Red Flags. I'm going to just point out a couple of the items on there. So this just lists out kind of what are those main things that when funders, when grantors are reviewing grant applications that kind of make them say like, oh, there's a gap here, or we might need to look into this a little further, right? So we're gonna go over some of those. I just want to say before we do that, there's not a perfect grant application, or there's rarely a perfect grant application, right? Like give yourself some grace here. We are humans. And in a lot of cases, like you could have that perfect grant application and your application could still be rejected because there's too many people asking for money. Grantors have to make hard decisions, right? So a denial doesn't mean that you are a bad person or a bad grant writer or that your project's unworthy. I just want to point out that a 50% success rate in grant writing is like off the charts amazing. And a 30% is closer to the average of what you're gonna see. So if you walk into it that way of I'm going to apply to 10 grants and I might receive awards for 3, that's gonna put you in reality a little bit. Also though, the only way to guarantee you won't get a grant is if you don't apply. So no reason to not put that application in if you have the capacity to do it. And if it's a solid match to your project, right? Okay, so that said, there are things you can do to ensure that you have a strong proposal. And a lot of it is just awareness. And it's not about whether or not you're a good writer. It's just about having the information available. It's about that organization piece. So grant writing isn't as much about writing skills as it is about organization skills, right? That may be great news for some people. That may be horrible news for some people. I don't know. So a couple of the items that are in that handout that I just want to point out really quick. So your organizational leadership does not represent the population served. So again, this goes back to your organization, and it's nothing necessarily wrong with your project or program, but it's like, who is your organization? Who do you represent? And do you have representation in your organization? So this isn't something that you're going to be able to fix today, right? You're not going to change who your board members are right now, but you can put some actions in place to start to make some of those changes. You can have that conversation with your board about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and you can think about how would you begin to address this, right? If you all remember when we had that conversation about belonging, might have even been the first session, it was a while ago. It's about showing that you're putting an effort in. It's not about being at the pinnacle or whatever, because we're never going to be there, right? So what changes are you looking at is the point there. So disproportionate overhead or indirect costs. So this is maybe an issue in your project budget. If you have a project budget and you're showing, over 25% of that budget is going towards overhead or indirect. And again, those overhead or indirect costs are like those general operating, administrative, your HR, finance, IT, all of those pieces that are real and true costs, and for a lot of us are over 25% of our organizational costs. But are not costs that affect the project or program directly. So aiming to keep these below 25%. Some grants, a lot of funders are going to max you out at 10% and say, we don't want to see an admin or overhead over 10%. Some are going to say, we will not consider funding admin or overhead at all. So if they have those restrictions, being aware of them. And if they don't have those restrictions, being aware of how much you're pushing it, right? We know those are real costs, but the majority of your costs are they're wanting to see go directly to the project or program that you're applying for funding for. I want to call out lack of evaluation protocols. So when they ask, how are you measuring success? Can you say, we measure success through an annual survey to all current clients, or we measure success by doing, looking at the test scores of all of the students that we serve and comparing them year to year, just be able to say something. We use this type of survey for this reason, or we interview people regularly, we keep case notes, whatever it is. Having a plan in place. A lack of other sources of support. So funders rarely want to be the first or the only organization to fund a program, but we know you have to start somewhere. They know they have to start somewhere. Somebody has to be the first, right? It's nice if the first funding, it's going to help you a lot. We've had this conversation in this class, but it's going to help your project a lot if that first funding coming in is local donor support, right? And that's just a really good way to get that snowball effect, get the ball rolling. If the funder is seeing proposals from two organizations or two nonprofits who are occupying the same niche, who are like filling the same space and doing the same work, they have to make a hard decision on who they think is having a bigger impact within that space, right? If the funder has a standing relationship with a nonprofit that's working within your same focus area, how are you going, like, it's good if you have that information to be aware of that, like, oh, actually this funder has funded my sister organization for the past 10 years. If I'm applying to them now, how am I going to differentiate my organization? Like, how am I going to show that, like, we're both here, we're both working in the same sector, but we're distinct and different for these reasons, and my program or my projects or my services are valuable for these reasons, right? Funders may notice if your board members are not contributing to your organization financially, or sometimes it can show through in an application that your board members maybe don't have expertise or aren't volunteering or things like that. It's mostly the financial piece. So having that, I wouldn't say that that's something that needs to be like in your project narrative, like you don't need to put that like in your project summary or something like that. Like, by the way, all of our board members donated this year. But when you're showing your organizational budget, that budget that's like for your full organization, all of your organization costs, if you can have a line in there that shows board contributions, that's just a nice place to line it out. To line that out for anybody who's looking over your organization budget. And then, let's see, one that's on that list, we're skipping all around here, so if there's questions or anything, stop me and we can have a further conversation. But another one on that list that I wanted to call out, assuming that the reader is familiar with your cause, using acronyms or jargon, and not giving that like basic background of what your organization does, right? So, and this is when it's important to have somebody else reviewing it before you submit that application. So, because it's hard, like we live this work every day, right? So, it can be difficult to kind of step out of that and write something that is that the average person can understand and follow and understand why this has an impact. Tammy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would just add as a communicator that that is one of the most important things, because if you lose your grantor's attention in the first page because it's filled with acronyms that requires them to research and figure out what you're talking about, they probably aren't going to continue. So just writing everything out, not using acronyms really at all. You can use them like in a parentheses behind the description so that, you know, if it pops up on a back-end report or something like that, they understand what it is. But you'll lose their attention really quickly if they have to try too hard to understand what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tammy. And the last one I just wanted to call out was a budget that's put together quickly, maybe at the end of an application that might have some errors or doesn't have great formatting, is kind of hard to navigate and difficult to understand like where those line items match to your project, right? So when I'm writing grants, I usually, like, before anything is submitted, I'm focused in on the narrative, right? And then I have financial support, who's way better at finances than I am, who's putting a budget together. And this kind of goes to something that Terry had pointed out earlier, like how many people are in your organization, how many different brains are working on this application, and who's making sure in the end that you have like a cohesive story going together. I like to make that check in the end to just do that. Like sometimes I'll even highlight, if I'm putting numbers into the budget narrative, I'm gonna just highlight them as a note to myself. And when I have that budget template done in the end, I'm gonna just put the two documents next to each other and just compare all of those numbers and make sure they're lining up, right? And using those notes, a lot of times if the funder is providing you a budget template, they're going to ask for like a line item justification or a description or whatever. Using that description section to just show where those numbers are coming from. If you're putting $50,000 in personnel, then in the description section, you might say that supports, you know, whatever it is, 0.25 of this FTE of this staff and 0.5 FTE of this staff for 1 year, right? So just that communication, like, how are you communicating through the budget as well? Is it easy to process? Is it easy to understand? And does it match your narrative? So there's a couple others in the grant writing red flags document. It's just a nice check to have to get familiar with those points in there. But we'll move on from that for now. And let's look at, are you ready? Do you have everything in place to get your grant proposal together? So, a planning overview. So you have found a funding opportunity right? And you have your project in mind. So look at that funding opportunity and ask yourself like, how complex is this grant application? Are they asking me for a 3-page document? Or are they asking me for a 23-page document, right? The length and complexity of planning of what they're asking from you on the front end is generally going to mirror the length and complexity of the project on the other side, right? So, it makes a lot of sense that if somebody is going to support you with 5 years of funding, they might want more detailed information about your organization, who your organization is, how your organization is going to change over 5 years, and then what's your project, and how's your project going to change over 5 years, right? The project type, that, you know, that capital program capacity, that's going to dictate, that's also going to affect the kind of planning that's required, right? If it's a capital request, then you're going to plan a lot differently than if it's a program request. If it's capital, you're going to have to get some contractors involved and you're going to have to organize those pieces. Excuse me. Okay, and then project readiness. You know, have you gone through that project charter piece and are you ready to go? And then new versus existing projects. Is this something you've been offering for a while? Or is this a brand new project or program that is going to have a little, like, going to have higher variables that maybe you need to do some planning beforehand to describe how you're going to respond to different things that come up in a new project or program. Okay, so we're going to look at, the next couple of slides are going to look at the different requirements for a grant. And as we go through this section, just ask yourself what actions you need to take prior to starting your proposal. So for each of these different requirements that comes up, where are you personally and what might you need to do? What do you need to gather? What actions do you need to take? So just take some notes, and we're looking at what are some actions you can take in the next 30 days. So, looking at technical requirements for your grant, if this is a funder that you're going back to for a second time, so you've had a previous grant with them, is that grant closed out successfully? Did you submit a report and were all the grant requirements met? So if the grant requirements were not met, if you haven't reported yet, review the original grant award letter, and then follow up on those things before you start any sort of a new application for that funder. So come back and say, oh my gosh, I think I missed a deadline. Can I submit a report at this time? And start that conversation with that funder. Are the eligibility requirements met? So have you ensured that you meet all of the eligibility requirements that the funder has put out there? So review the requirements, read the small print, right? Know what the funder's funding priorities are, and check the start end dates of their funding cycle to make sure that your project fits within that timeline. Okay, so that's reading the fine print. And then have you reached out or have you had a conversation with a representative, sorry, of the organization? And that's, again, if this is allowed, if there's an invite to have a phone conversation or share an email or introduce yourself, have you taken advantage of that opportunity? And if not, then now is a great time to reach out when you have that project outline ready and that funder identified. Okay, proposal narrative requirements. So again, just ask yourself, like, where am I and what can I do? So looking at that proposal narrative, we have a request identified and we're in the grant writing phase, right? So is your narrative, does your narrative include all the requested information and have you argued all aspects of your case? So if you don't have these pieces together, so the question to ask yourself, sorry, this is worded weird. The question to ask yourself is, am I including enough information for the funder to understand all aspects of my program? So look at the section headings like need and expected outcomes. And that's kind of what this is referring to, right? So can I respond to that need statement? And do I have outcomes listed? And then can I make the argument for why? And then the third point on here, did you demonstrate alignment with the funder's mission? So have you laid out to the funder why your project or program is a good match for their funding? So review how the funder discusses relevant issues and include terms and phrases that are a priority to them. So reflecting their language back, how and when it makes sense to do so. And then, just being sure that you're familiar with their mission and their funding priorities and working those ideas into your project or program. Okay, so community engagement requirements. So ask yourself, excuse me, ask yourself where you're at and if there are any actions you can take. So is your proposal, is your project outline reflective of the community? Do you have board, staff, volunteers, clients obviously, that are reflective of your service area or the people that you serve, right? Or are you working towards this and what are you doing? Specific to the project or program, do you have a plan or can you show that you've incorporated input from the population you serve into your project's development? So have I asked the people that are going to receive this project or program what works for them? And if you haven't, then ask yourself, like, how do I know that this project is needed in the community? Like, why am I doing this, basically? And that could be something that's really obvious, and it might not mean that you need to go back and collect a bunch of data. It might not mean that you have to go back to square one. It's just a prompt to ask yourself, like, well, what is that answer and how do I show that? For example, is there an increase in the number of participants requesting more services or a specific service? Have the participants you met with described changing circumstances that make this need urgent? Share this input. Okay, and last point on here. If the success of your project is dependent on one or more partnerships, are these partnerships formalized into an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, or do you have a letter of support showing that that partner is committed to this project? And if the answer is no on that, then it might be a good time to reach out to your key program partners and just say, like, hey, I'm in the application stage now. Like, this is real now. So is this a good time to get a letter of support for you? I will need it by this date. I'm happy to outline a template for you, or let's get together and talk about what an MOU would look like if we want to go into that formal partnership down that lane. So now's the time to start making actions on formalizing those partnerships. Okay, so with all of that information, sorry, that's a lot of talking. Let's do a breakout and take about maybe a little less than 10 minutes, 7 minutes. to just report out in your small groups what actions you're going to need to take. So what did that section bring up for you, and what actions are you going to be able to take in the next 30 days?
All rooms should be open. If you messaged me, that you could not join or your technology is not working, I should have you in a separate one, but if for some reason you joined a group, let me know. There's like 3 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. I think the rest is just wrap up, but
Yeah. Yeah, we should be good on time. Everyone should be joining within the next 15 seconds.
Thank you. Welcome back. Okay, so we won't do too much of a debrief, for the breakout, besides to say, I hope you all are taking notes. And, I hope some good ideas are coming through, just for, yeah, the actionable items to take away from this course. So we've worked a lot within the project charter today, and I've referenced that a lot. So most or all of the pieces in there should should be coming together at this point. So again, just use that as a reference. This is just the initial outline for your grant application, and from there you should be able to expand on that, and it should line up to the application questions that you're seeing pretty closely. Quickly, any new knowledge or skills that anybody would like to report out on? Would anybody like to share some of their action items to take on in the next 30 days?
I don't have action items for 30 days, but just like in talking with this last one, our first breakout session, I was saying how I felt, I think, a little bit more inspired and feeling like, okay, I'm getting this underneath me. And then that last one after your talk, I gotta say I was sort of like, now I'm feeling, uh-oh.
Oh no.
But I wasn't alone, but we talked through it, I thought, and bringing up different things and different experiences from other people and reminding ourselves of that. But it was sort of that initial of you're high and then
Yeah, you're like, oh, that is a huge list of things. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it is a lot of pieces to think about. And I think keeping in mind, you know, giving yourself that grace, and not letting those like that like perfectionism to take over, right? Like
right.
getting something submitted and getting something in front of funders is the ultimate goal here, right? So if you know, maybe that support letter isn't ready yet and you just have to say like, I'm partnering with this organization, like give yourself
Right.
some room to do that, right?
There was also a question that was brought up, which I thought was also fair of, and for those in our last group, please tell me if I'm saying this wrong, but when it came up with about the DEI, whether the DEI wasn't fully on the board yet, maybe they got a thing saying that they needed to work more, even though they tried to address it in a letter. Obviously it's case by case and different things, but if you're trying to say, look, we recognize that maybe we aren't as diverse, and these are our goals going toward it, and this is how the funding can help it. Do you think that people look for that, or is it just of you got to say you got the DEI established already and then we'll consider you, as a general rule?
No, I think showing, I think being able to say like, we are aware as an organization of like who we are and what we're doing, right? Like just being able to show that level of transparency and awareness, right? And then saying, and we've had this conversation and we have these long-term plans, and you know, I'm looking at these actions, whatever it is, whether that's like you know, we're recruiting within our board or whatever you can show, right? But no, I think funders are very willing to consider the progress towards something else, right? Okay, I'm going to, so let's talk about our next session. The next and final session will have our funder panel. And we're going to have representatives from Innovia Foundation, Sherwood Trust Foundation, and the Ford Family Foundation. Inovia, is a private foundation that serves Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho. And Scott Ferguson will be joining us. He is their associate director of grants. Brian Hunt from the Sherwood Trust, he's the CEO there. He'll be joining us, and the Sherwood Trust is a private foundation that serves the Walla Walla Valley. And then Levi is going to join us from the Ford Family Foundation. And the Ford Family Foundation serves rural Oregon, so all of Oregon's rural spaces, and then a little bit of Northern California and Siskiyou County. So we're going to have these guys here to talk to us next session. And I want to put the option out there. Sometimes we have people that are very interested in this and sometimes not so much. So either way is fine. We'll have some time at the beginning, before the actual funders panel starts in earnest, for individuals or organizations to, I'm gonna say, pitch their project or their organization. So to just do a quick 1 minute, here's the summary statement that I made as part of this project charter. Here's who my organization is, and this is what we're trying to do. So if anybody's interested in that, throw it in the chat now. You can private message me or Jimena, or we'll send that opportunity out via email and let us know via email. We're looking for, we don't want any more than probably 5 people to be a part of this, although everybody is invited to just put their summary statement in the chat and share that way. So we really want to get that back and forth going with the funders. So I just want to put that opportunity out there. Just to get a quick feel for how that's coming. Do we have anybody that's definitely interested in having that section? Yeah, okay, cool. Great. So again, send Jimena or I chat right now, or we will send out an email hopefully earlier than next Tuesday, and we'll try to get it out this afternoon and send out an email and give you guys that invitation. And then otherwise, homework. Filling out that project charter, so you should have that pretty ready to go at this point. And then for that funder panel, after we have that kind of proposal sharing section, we're going to go into questions with the funders. So I have a list of canned questions ready, but they want to hear from you, and this is your opportunity to interact with them. So think about what questions you have for these funders. I think, Jimena, can you share everybody's websites, the website for each funder for the funder panel?
Yeah.
Awesome. So if you want to do a little research beforehand on these funders, that would be helpful to be prepared to ask them some questions. And then if there's any gaps or anything where you're like, oh, we didn't touch on that, send me and Jimena an email and we'll try to get it covered. We'll have some time to just debrief in next week's session. Okay. And we're gonna wrap up just a little early this time around. I'll stick around for the next couple minutes. And yeah, so nice to see you all, and thank you so much.
Bonnie, if we're not able to get potentially, I'm looking at 2 different budget things, and I'm trying to get finalized with some of that. Does that make a big difference with us talking to them of when they ask for, for our operating budget and stuff? If
Oh,
that's
no.
not finalized or whatever?
No, I don't think like for next week.
Right,
You might mention like, oh, we have an organization budget of this much, but
it can be more general.
yeah, definitely, I would, yeah, and even for the project budget, you might say like, I need to fundraise a total of 50,000 or whatever.
Right.
But even that can be fairly general. I wouldn't go into like, how that breaks down or anything like that.
No, it sounds good. It's very helpful. But yeah, interested, but also a little on the nervous side.
Oh, I mean, yeah, you see how I speak in front of crowds. It'd be much worse than that.
Well, I have no problem speaking in front of people. I just don't want to blow it, as the saying goes.
If you like, yeah, honestly, just aim for less than a minute, give yourself a minute, and yeah, and they all are there because they want to hear from you guys, so
Thank you.
cool. Thanks for volunteering. Okay, cool. All right, enjoy your afternoon, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Before you hit,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I just want to make sure I hit save in chat. So before
Okay.
you cancel it out, because I got it. So okay, never mind. Thank you.
Good. Okay. And that part's been working for you?